Well, next week we have WEF Davos 2023. I've got Iain Williamson, the CEO of Old Mutual, with me, who will be on the ground. But just before we get there, I thought we should have a temperature check in and chat about what your expectations are specifically for South Africa, for Africa, from Davos 2023.
Thanks, Bron. Well, speaking of temperature, I think it's -10 there next week, so we'll be having to take our warm woolies with us. Yeah, I think obviously there's quite a big delegation attending from South Africa and I think from various countries across the continent. We use the World Economic Forum as essentially a marketing opportunity to market South Africa's prospects to the world, and I use it personally to conduct quite a lot of bilateral meetings with our reinsurers, various suppliers, and other potential business partners that happen to be there at the same time. I think in the global context, although we tend to get quite, I think, gloomy as South Africans, particularly given the energy crisis at the moment, I think we've actually got a good story to tell with the increased political certainty from the president's re-election at the ANC conference, and actually with our inflation cycle and interest rate cycle turning ahead of the rest of the world, we've got to, on a relative basis, we've got some positives to talk about. I do think we need to be put in a position, ideally we'd want to be in a position where we could talk a lot more positively about a resolution of the energy situation. I think that's the biggest issue at the moment that I think will be on investors' minds and worrying people around, SA Inc., as it were, as a country.
And Iain, so as we go into the forum, what can we as business do? And obviously this is working together with the public sector and with civil society, but what can we do to basically overcome these shared challenges that we face as South Africa?
I think it's really about leaning into the problem and bringing the tools that the private sector has to bear to solve some of those problems. Our chief economist has coined the term now privatization by stealth. And what you're seeing happening in the energy space is there's a lot of complementary energy supply solutions being put in place, mostly by business and private sector initiatives. So, for example, we have our entire campus in Cape Town run off solar. It's not yet totally off the grid, but we have an application in with the municipality to go completely off the grid and to put further infrastructure in place with wheeling back into the grid. So any excess that we can produce that's not required for our own purposes, we can send back into the grid. It's technologically feasible. It's economically possible. The business case makes sense, but all we need is the regulatory kind of barriers to be removed to get that underway. And I think that's just one small example of, I think, a lot of things that are popping up around the country starting to supply that kind of alternative solution. But fundamentally, we need to see Eskom itself solved, and I think that's a combination of a multifaceted approach, including all the security issues around it, the actual fixing of the infrastructure, but more importantly, a sense that you don't take one step forward and two steps backwards due to some of the criminal elements and sabotage around some of the things that have been done.
Having come out of COP27 recently, we know climate change is firmly on the agenda and progress was made at COP27. How do you think we can take the climate change agenda from a South African perspective? Because again, it's going to be big at the World Economic Forum.
Yeah, it is one of the big 3 or 4 topics is climate and energy globally is an issue, not only for us. I think that the South African situation, I think, is a little bit nuanced in the sense that, there is a point of view that says we're a developing nation with a massive unemployment problem. And so one needs to tread a little bit carefully around how you navigate the transition from a currently coal heavy, but also labor intensive energy system to a non-carbon energy system, but that allows job creation as part of that solution. I think that's an important component for us. And so having a proper roadmap around how one does that transition is critical. I think it's easy to sort of glibly talk from a developed world perspective about, we must just, switch on solar and wind and hydro and all those good things. But I think the economic implications for us of moving too quickly are also problematic. So it's really about that balance, I think, of making sure that we navigate this responsibly from an economic point of view. So I think, again, business has put together a form of a roadmap through the National Business Initiative that tries to consider all of these things and to pull it together into a bit of a plan. I think we need to see the new CEO of Eskom being appointed. I think we need to see some progress on the Eskom side, and critically, the bridge, if you like, between the private sector effort and what we have is the access to the grid, and being able to have the necessary access points, which are often in fairly remote places, where the sun shines the best in the Northern Cape, and it's the least well developed from a grid infrastructure perspective. So, gluing together those pieces of the puzzle so that it all comes together properly needs some proper planning and coordination.
Now, there is a criticism that's often thrown at the World Economic Forum, and that is that it's elitist, it's exclusionary, and it certainly doesn't cater for the broader population or broader humanity. What is your view when you hear that criticism, Ian, given that you take the forum seriously?
Yeah, look, I think it's a fair criticism. Inevitably, it's held in a kind of fairly exclusive location. It's expensive to get there. It's fairly remote. Now, there's good reasons for that, I think, from a security perspective. When you've got, some of your top global leaders attending and what have you, it's a relatively easy place to put the security logistics around. But it does result in this consequence that it is difficult to access. So I think that is a fair criticism. Having said that, I think that it is a fairly unique opportunity in the sense of the influences that it pulls into one place that allow conversations to take place that can't really take place in other fora and other situations. So I think that's where it adds some value. This year we are participating in the launch of what we've dubbed the Africa Collective, which is a partnership with a Swiss-based think tank called Africa Services, ourselves, and the African Free Trade Secretariat. And the idea is to try to elevate the voice of Africa, in a sense, and the presence of Africa on the agenda at WEF. So we're trying to almost do a little bit of a sort of a takeover of the Thursday day with a Africa kind of driven agenda as part of the launch of that Africa Collective. The idea is really just to try to elevate the voice of the African nations and the unique perspectives, needs, and challenges and opportunities that I think that Africa has that the rest of the world perhaps doesn't have. I think if you play the video forward 50 years, Africa is the most demographically favorable part of the world of any. We have a growing population, favorable demographics, but we suffer from a lack of coordination. The free trade agreement, I think, is an important component, and we suffer from a lack of infrastructure and a lack of investment. So if we can get the rest of the world to see the opportunity and help us to solve the investment and infrastructure problem. And I think we could be well on our way. I don't think it's a short-term thing. I mean, I don't think we're talking, a 5-year time horizon here, but, more for the benefit of our children and for ourselves. Africa could really become a powerhouse with the right sort of infrastructure and investment behind it.
Well, looking forward to hearing more about the Africa Collective on Thursday at the World Economic Forum, Davos, Switzerland, and of course to more conversations with you, Iain, on the ground. Iain Williamson is the CEO of Old Mutual.